Marie Antoinette's children were born into a world that looked untouchable. They lived at Versailles, the most glittering palace in Europe, surrounded by servants, ceremony, and the kind of luxury most people could not even imagine. Everything about their lives screamed power. And yet, almost none of that would save them, because these were not just royal children. They were children born into a collapsing dynasty. By the time the French Revolution was done, one of them was dead. Another had been driven half-mad in prison, one vanished into tragedy and rumor, and only one would live long enough to carry the memory of it all. That is what makes this story so grim. It is not just about Marie Antoinette, the doomed queen people still argue about centuries later. It is about what happened to the children standing beside her when the hatred aimed at the monarchy finally came crashing through the palace doors. Marie Antoinette herself had arrived in France as a political bride. She was born in Vienna on November 2nd, 1755, the daughter of Emperor Francis I and Empress Maria Theresa. In 1770, when she was only 14, she married Louis XVI, and almost immediately, her marriage became public entertainment. The morning after the wedding, people were already gossiping that the marriage had not been consummated. That alone tells you how bizarre royal life was. Imagine being a teenage girl in a foreign country and having an entire court obsess over what did or did not happen in your bedroom. Worse still, the rumors were true. Years passed. No child came. And in a monarchy, that was never just awkward, it was dangerous. A queen who could not produce an heir quickly became a target, especially one the public already distrusted. Then, in 1778, Marie Antoinette finally gave birth to a daughter, Marie-Thérèse. Even that was turned into a spectacle. Reports claimed that around 200 people crowded into the room to witness the birth. That was Versailles in all its absurdity. Even a queen could barely give birth in private. 3 years later, in 1781, a son finally arrived. Louis Joseph was the long-awaited male heir, the Dauphin, the child who seemed to secure the future of the Bourbon line. Marie adored him. By all accounts, she cared deeply for her children, but caring for them and actually raising them were two different things. Court etiquette controlled almost everything. Even motherhood had rules. So, when she wanted peace, she took her children to the Petit Trianon, her private retreat away from the suffocating performance of court life. But outside that protected little world, resentment toward her kept growing. Marie Antoinette was foreign, glamorous, controversial, and easy to hate. Her enemies painted her as frivolous, immoral, and unfit. And in time, even her children were dragged into that storm. Then the family kept growing. In 1785, Marie Antoinette gave birth to another son, Louis Charles. Under ordinary circumstances, that should have been another moment of security for the crown. Another prince, another sign that the dynasty would continue. Instead, it gave people something new to whisper about. By that point, Marie Antoinette's name was already wrapped in scandal. She had been linked to the Swedish diplomat Axel von Fersen, and rumors of an affair had spread widely. So when Louis Charles was born, people began suggesting that the child was not even the king's son. Whether the rumor was true mattered less than the fact that it spread, because once a monarchy starts looking weak, ridiculous, or dishonored, it becomes easier for people to stop fearing it. And then tragedy struck again. In 1786, Marie Antoinette gave birth to her fourth and final child, a daughter named Sophie Beatrix. The baby was born prematurely and died before she reached her first birthday. For all the luxury surrounding them, the royal family could not protect themselves from the most ordinary kind of grief. And that loss was only the beginning. In the summer of 1789, their eldest son, Louis Joseph, died at just 7 years old. He had been sickly for much of his life, and historians believe he may have suffered from tuberculosis of the spine. He was the Dauphin, the future of the French monarchy, and suddenly he was gone. Marie Antoinette had barely any time to mourn him, because only weeks later, France exploded. The French Revolution began, and from that point on, the lives of her children would be shaped not by court ritual, but by fear. At first, the royal family remained in Paris, while the revolution gathered strength around them. But it did not take long to see where things were heading. The monarchy was being openly challenged, revolutionary anger was growing, the mood was turning ugly, and everyone could feel it. So the family decided to run. In June 1791, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette disguised themselves and attempted to flee France with their children. Their destination was Belgium, where Marie hoped her Habsburg relatives could offer protection. They came painfully close to escaping, but in the town of Varennes, the king was recognized. That was the end of it. The family was arrested, brought back, and from that moment on, they were no longer a royal household trying to hold on to power. They were prisoners. They would never return to Versailles. Instead, the revolutionaries placed the whole family, including the children, in a medieval fortress where they could be watched closely and cut off from the world. For Louis Charles, that meant the destruction of everything his life had been. He had been born into the glittering world of Versailles in 1785. He had spent his earliest years in its bright halls, surrounded by rank, ceremony, and privilege. But when his older brother died, Louis Charles became the new Dauphin, the new heir to the throne. In another era, that title would have opened the world to him. In revolutionary France, it marked him for suffering. To the men now in power, Louis Charles was not an innocent child. He was the son of a tyrant, a symbol of everything they wanted erased. So they shut him away. He was separated from his family and kept confined for years. His jailers abused him, neglected him, and turned him into a political tool. At Marie Antoinette's trial, they forced the boy to accuse his own mother of molesting him. It was one of the ugliest moments in the entire downfall of the French monarchy. Marie Antoinette denied the accusation fiercely. It changed nothing. The trial was never going to save her. The verdict was already sitting there, waiting for the formality to catch up. She was convicted and executed by guillotine on October 16, 1793, and her son was not even told. While the Queen was being led to her death, Louis Charles was being left to rot in prison. He was beaten, shut away in a cell, crawling with fleas and fouled by human waste, and cut off from any comfort or love. Over time, the child began to collapse physically and mentally. It is one of the bleakest parts of this story. Not just that a queen died, but that a child was slowly destroyed in the wreckage left behind. Marie-Thérèse, the eldest daughter, endured her own version of that nightmare. The revolutionaries imprisoned her from 1792 to 1795. She was still a teenager, isolated and heavily controlled, with almost nothing to do except read the same 2 books again and again. Her brother Louis Charles was being held nearby, close enough for her to hear him, but not close enough to reach him. She could hear him crying when his jailers beat him. Imagine that kind of helplessness, not being told the full truth, not being allowed contact, but still hearing the suffering through the walls. And as if that were not enough, her family was disappearing one by one. Her mother was executed, her aunt was executed, her brother died. Yet much of this was hidden from her by the people holding her captive. She was trapped not just in a prison cell, but in a carefully controlled silence. By the time she was finally released in December 1795, the worst of the terror had passed. But almost everyone she loved was gone. She was now the only surviving child of Marie Antoinette, and she was sent to Austria to live with her mother's family. Back at her trial in 1793, Marie Antoinette seems to have understood exactly what was being taken from her. She declared that she had once been a queen, and they had taken her crown, a wife, and they had killed her husband, a mother, and they had taken her children. That was the deepest cruelty of all. Not simply that she would die, but that she would die knowing her children were still behind her, trapped in the same nightmare. In her final days, she thought constantly about Louis Charles. She knew he was imprisoned. She knew she could not reach him. And shortly before her execution, she wrote of the agony of being forced to leave her children behind. Louis Charles died in June 1795 at just 10 years old. Tuberculosis is believed to have killed him, though the appalling conditions of his imprisonment almost certainly helped break his body. A doctor who examined him managed to smuggle out the boy's heart, which would later be buried near the graves of his parents. Had the monarchy survived, Louis Charles would have become King Louis XVII. Instead, he vanished behind bars and died in secrecy. That secrecy created another strange chapter in the story. Because so little seemed certain about his death, rumors began spreading that he had escaped, and once those rumors started, they refused to die. More than 100 impostors would later claim to be the lost Dauphin. One of them, Charles Guillaume Naundorf, was so bold that he even contacted Marie Thérèse and tried to convince her that he was really her brother. And the terrible thing is, the uncertainty was strong enough to be tormenting. Even Baron von Thugut, a respected Austrian diplomat, argued that there was no solid legal certainty that Louis XVI's son was truly dead. The proof was thin, a body had been presented, reports had been written, newspapers had printed the claim, but none of it felt final enough to silence doubt. So Marie-Thérèse had to live with yet another wound, not only losing her family, but never being fully free of the question of whether her brother had really died the way they said he had. She was the only one of Marie Antoinette's 4 children to survive the French Revolution. In 1799, she married her cousin, Louis Antoine, a man with his own claim to the French throne. Then, in 1830, in one of history's strangest ironies, she briefly became Queen of France. Briefly means briefly. Her reign lasted around 20 minutes. Less than half an hour later, her husband abdicated in favor of his nephew. It is such a bizarre detail that it almost sounds invented. After losing her family, surviving imprisonment, and carrying the trauma of the revolution for years, Marie-Thérèse finally stood in the position her mother had once held, only for it to disappear almost instantly. She never truly recovered from everything she had lived through. Though she did return to France, exile kept returning too. So did the rumors. So did the grief. So did the memory of prison, of loss, of a brother crying behind a wall she could not cross. Marie-Thérèse died in 1851 at the age of 72. And in the end, that may be the cruelest part of this whole story. Marie Antoinette's children were born into one of the most dazzling courts in Europe. They had rank, wealth, servants, titles, and the kind of life ordinary people could barely imagine. But none of it protected them. When the monarchy fell, it did not spare the children standing inside it. It swallowed them too,